finding out that your entire life for the last 20-plus years has been a complete lie, and that everyone significant to you either participated in, condoned, or acquiesced in that lie, is a heavy burden, right? That's what happened for Andrew Masters. Andy sat at his desk in his office, feeling depressed and feeling a little sorry for himself, justifiably so, as he happened to be in the midst of an extraordinary luxury December and Christmas cruise with his wife, 2 daughters, and his in-laws. But a week before departure for home port, his father-in-law, Marvin Monk, called him to a meeting in his luxurious executive office. "Listen, Andy, I understand that you're looking forward to a cruise with your family, but I've got some work issues going on, and I really need you in the office for the entire month of December. Of course, without your presence, a family cruise won't be such a family event. But please rest assured that I will make up for this in your bonus, as well as organizing a special luxury vacation for you, Katie, and the girls over the next year, which, of course, the company will pay in full." Andy did not agree with Marvin, but for some reason the older man seemed unyielding, and that evening Andy talked with his wife and daughters over a home-cooked dinner. "Oh no," said Katie. "Dad knows how important the Christmas holidays are for the family. It's just so unfair that you have to miss them. Do you want me to talk to my mom and try to convince her to change her mind?" He shrugged. "Well, yes, it will be useful, dear. Thank you." Their twin daughters, Cassandra and Emily, spoke. "Yes, please, Mom. We can't have Dad missing out on the family Christmas holiday. It won't be right." Although Andy considered Cassandra and Emily his daughters, they were barely 2 years old when he met their mother, Katie, a recently divorced, single mother. She still spoke well of her ex-husband. "Bill was not and is not a bad person. Not really. We just probably got married too young, and I think we both had completely different aspirations. We grew apart. He went away for 2 years to photograph and paint wildlife in different parts of the world, and we decided that divorcee was the best option for us. I didn't ask for child support, but he paid it regularly, so everything was fine. When Andy met Kathy, he had just completed his MBA in Management and Business Communications, and over dinner, he impressed Kathy's father, Marvin, with his deep knowledge of business, especially the industry in which Marvin himself worked. By the end of the evening, Andy had arranged a meeting with Marvin the next morning to discuss the possibility of working on the staff of his rapidly growing business empire. Andy continued to date Katie and discovered that he loved the twins as if they were his own daughters. After a year of dating, he proposed to Katie. She accepted. They got married. And Andy continued to work for Marvin, eventually taking the position of Marvin's assistant referent. He was the perfect employee, the perfect husband, the perfect father to the girls, and the perfect son-in-law to Marvin and Claire. It was he who dealt with the monsters under the girls' beds and the monsters in their closets, who took turns getting up at night and comforting them when they were sick, helped them with homework, consoled them when their dates didn't go according to plan, etc. He made sure to treat the girls as his princesses and their mother as his queen. Katie did not work, but was active in several charities funded by GWS, a company run by her father. She was the real queen of local social life. 16 years later, he suddenly felt like a dinosaur in one of those cartoons that depict dinosaurs with food falling out of their mouths and looking up in amazement as a 6-mile-wide asteroid known as the Chicxulub asteroid screamed through the sky, ending life as they knew it. It was December, a few days before Christmas, and he missed his wife and daughters terribly. He grumbled to himself about having to stay at work while his family enjoyed a month-long cruise to the Caribbean. He didn't know why he had to stay at work, but at home the bed seemed very large and empty, and the house seemed like a booming echo of silence. For lack of a better expression, his hitherto ideal life was disrupted by his personal Chicxulub asteroid. When Marvin's personal assistant, Julia Weston, knocked nervously on his office door. "Andy, would you please give me a minute of your time?" "Of course I will, Julia. Please close the door and sit down. You look a little worried. Can I help you?" At this moment, Julia began to cry. And then, Andy noticed that she came into his office with a pack of tissues with which she wiped her eyes. "Thank you, Andy. It's so nice of you. This is exactly what I expected from such a wonderful, resilient guy like you. But I came to you with a problem that does not concern me, but with information about a problem that concerns you." "Please continue," Andy said, knowing that no matter what she said to him, he wouldn't like it. "We're talking about that month-long family cruise for December and Christmas that you obviously got kicked out of at the last minute." Andy nodded silently. "I helped Marvin book a cruise, but I didn't understand what was going on with him until he told you that you were dropped at the last minute. Andy, the truth is that there was no reservation for you on this cruise at all. Your place was taken in advance by Bill Baxter, your wife's ex-husband. He is registered with her in the same luxury cabin. I'm sorry that I was the one who had to tell you about this." Andy felt completely devastated by this news. He thanked Julia for helping him by providing this information. "Why are you telling me this, Julia? And I don't want to sound like a jerk, but you don't have any evidence. Excuse me? I emailed you the booking documents. And also, why did I do this? Because I know what a wonderful person you are. I saw how much you love Katie and the girls, and I realized that I would never allow them to do this to you. Letting Katie's ex-husband take your place on this cruise is nothing short of asshole behavior on the part of all of them. I've worked with Marvin for 25 years. I've known Claire and Katie and the twins since I left college, and I never thought for a minute that he could be so two-faced and, for lack of a better word, so damn evil." "What are you going to do, Julia?" "I am taking early retirement from GWS immediately and moving to Florida to live with my daughter and son-in-law. They're starting a business, and I'm going to roll over my 401k into their newly formed corporation. Ever since my husband died 10 years ago, I've been getting more and more restless. And since my daughter and Dan often asked me to move in with them, and given the way Marvin screwed you up, I thought, if Marvin did something so shitty to you, my own son-in-law, what chance do I have if he decides to do something similar to me?" "I know what you mean, Julia. I really do. However, please assure me that you will not leave simply because of what is happening to me." Julia shook her head. "It certainly helped me decide, Andy, but not more." They both stood up and he hugged her. "Thank you for bringing me up to date. Apparently my so-called family is up to no good. I'll keep you posted. We will keep in touch." She left his office, and Andy realized he had something to think about. After what Julia said, Florida seems like a good option, he thought. A few days later, on Christmas morning, he sat alone in the house he shared with Katie and her girls. He realized that his attitude towards them was changing. The house he shared with them is no longer shared, and Cassandra and Emily are no longer his daughters. Cassandra and Emily are now her girls. Is this why Katie always rejected the idea of adoption? Did he wonder? And what he considered a house is now just a building, if that. Even before he found out that Bill Baxter was replacing him, Andy wasn't too keen on the idea of finding someone to spend Christmas with. But now that Katie and the girls had gone on a fucking month-long family cruise with her ex-husband, he realized he didn't want to hang out with any of the friends he'd made since getting together with Katie and the girls. After all, most of them were Kathy's friends first and Andy's friends second, so how many of them know that he's Kathy's clown? No, it's better to stay away from them. He was an only child and his parents died when he was very young, so he has no family of his own to visit. So that year, he decided not to celebrate Christmas at all. He thought about cooking himself something for Christmas dinner. Walmart has a variety of instant Christmas meals, from Kraft Deluxe white cheddar, easy macaroni, and cheese that can be easily reheated in the microwave, to frozen Stauffer's roast, a tender white turkey. He realized that if he bought any of these things, he would look like the biggest loser in the world, and decided to avoid anything that reminded him in any way of the Christmas meal. And then, on Christmas morning, his phone rang. The screen showed that it was Katie. He decided to answer the call. "Merry Christmas, Dad." It was Cassandra calling from her mother's phone. "Merry Christmas, Cassandra. And also Emily and Katie," he replied evenly. "Who are you celebrating Christmas with, Dad?" "With no one. In fact, I don't celebrate at all. After all, Christmas is a time for people with families. And since I don't have a family, I decided not to bother. Katie chimed in. Oh, are you feeling neglected, dear? When we get back, I'll fix everything. Besides, Dad says that the company will organize a nice vacation for you, me, and the girls next year. Good idea, Katie, really good. But how will your man, Bill Baxter, feel about this? After all, during the entire cruise, you will live with him in the same luxurious cabin, presumably as husband and wife. Katie gasped and said, "Who told you this? It's not what it seems." "True. This is not true." "Don't worry, Katie. I have no idea what I did to make you, your daughters, and your parents treat me this way, hate me so much. But don't worry. By the time you return from Christmas break, I will be long gone from home. And please tell your father that he can transfer Bill to my old job since I am leaving the company." He turned off the phone. Panic began in the ship's cabin. "Oh no, Dad?" Katie howled. "I tried so hard all these years to keep Andy and Bill as separate but equal husbands in my life. How can I fix this now?" Claire, her mother, intervened with a sour expression on her face. I warned you, Kathy, and you, Marvin, that the idea of separate but equal husbands was stupid, dangerous. But it has worked so well for the last 15 years. If only Andy hadn't found out about this. I wonder who told him." Claire shook her head. "It doesn't matter now." There was desperation in his voice over the phone. "Yes, and why not? As far as he understands, his wife left him for another man, her first love. I hope he doesn't do anything wrong." "Don't say that, Mom. I don't wish him anything bad. I love him." "Well, I think Andy almost certainly doesn't feel love from either of us at the moment," Claire said. And she was right. Andy felt unloved, humiliated, insulted, and ridiculed. And all this from those whom he mistakenly considered to be his family, who he believed loved him as much as he loved them. Andy was always jealous of the British and other Commonwealth countries who celebrated Boxing Day, or St. Stephen's Day, on December 26th. But now, on the morning of December 26th, he was glad that in American offices, this day was considered a regular working day, although sometimes with a tinge of regret from a hangover. He called the law firm of Cascade, Northern, and White early in the morning, although the only person he really wanted to talk to was Mary Northern, whom he had known since his student days, having become quite close with her brother Jake. Thanks to who he was, his call was transferred to Mary's personal number with minimal delay. "Hello, Andy. Happy holiday. What can I do for you this morning?" "Happy holiday to you too, Mary. Unfortunately, the call will be business, in some way. I need the services of a divorce lawyer." "Oh, no, Andy. What did she do to you?" This answer interested Andy. "Looks like she left me for her first husband, Bill Baxter." "Crap. Do you have proof?" "Yes, they are together, on a family cruise. So not only is she cheating on me, but her whole family is involved in this." At this moment, his voice almost broke. "Oh, baby, this is terrible. The whole family, including the girls? Crap. Look, I'll handle this personally for you. In fact, I'll save the afternoon for you if you don't mind." "At 1 p.m.? He agreed, and shortly before this time, he was shown into her office. "How do you want it to go, Andy? Reconciliation or divorce?" "I'm leaning toward divorce, Mary. To be honest, I understand why. But what if it's something new, them being on a cruise together?" "Yes, that's a good question. But what if she spends a month playing family with her ex-husband during a 4-week family Christmas cruise with her parents and my stepdaughters, and they all know she cuckolded me? In my opinion, this is already bad enough. But if this is the culmination of betrayal over the course of months, or even, God forbid, years, well, there is no escape from it, right?" "I wouldn't think so, Andy. Never. Sometimes I offer counseling, but this cruise thing is so out of the ordinary that I doubt it can be recovered from. Unless she has a damn good excuse." Mary gave Andy a small bottle of water, took one for herself, and began taking notes on an expensive electronic tablet called Remarkable. "Please tell me everything that happened lately, Andy." He told Mary about the meeting in which Marvin Monk told him that he was no longer invited on the family cruise and had to stay home and work in the office. But there is no compelling reason for him to remain in office. Then he told how Kathy told him that she would talk to her mother to get Marvin to change his mind. But now he believes that it was a lie, just to keep him silent. He faltered as he recounted how Julia Weston had come to him and told Andy that he had not, in fact, been signed up for the cruise, that his place had already been taken by Bill Baxter, his wife's ex-husband and father of the twins. This is what hurts so much. The girls should have known the truth, but they still lied, supposedly trying to make Marvin change his mind. Yes, Mary nodded. It must hurt. He shrugged. Yes, it hurts. Until now, I have always perceived the girls as my own daughters, but now I understand that they are just my stepdaughters. Well, actually, not even that. It always bothered me a little that Katie never allowed me to adopt her daughters, always brushing me off with excuses. Now I understand why. Apparently, she never considered me to be her real husband or a suitable father to her damn offspring. Don't do this to yourself, Andy. I know you were treated poorly, but don't let it turn you inside out. I have a list of therapists if you need one. Thanks, I'll keep it in mind. Andy, you should actually hire a private detective. We always recommend Jenner Investments. Doug Jenner, the company's director, is a former city police inspector. It's not cheap, but very good. He nodded, agreeing with her proposal. She sent Andy his contact information. Much less pretentious than giving people business cards, but so modern, she thought. At the end of the meeting, Mary stood up, hugged Andy, and said, I will prepare documents to sue her. In our state, divorces are either fault or no fault. How do you want to get a divorce? With or without fault? He nodded thoughtfully. I think it's my fault. And also, what do you want to do with your employer? What do you mean? What can I do? Sue them for constructive termination of the contract. If your employer forced you to miss family leave by leaving you to work while your wife, his daughter, was with another man, then the professional relationship between you and him cannot really be maintained, and you can sue for constructive termination agreement. Do you want me to do this? Yes, please. I didn't think about that. Thanks for the tip. He went home, packed a few suitcases, a gym bag, some electronics, and booked an apartment at the Marriott Hotel downtown. He took an Uber there and was settled within an hour. It's funny, he thought he might cry, but he seemed numb to everything that was happening. He took another Uber to the GWS office and, once in his office, asked Julia to meet him. I told her what had happened and said that he was quitting immediately. They hugged and Julia kissed him on the cheek. You're doing the right thing, Andy. If my husband did even half of what your so-called family is doing to you, I would gladly shoot him and get jail time for it. Although Davis was a good person, he probably wouldn't even consider being an asshole like Katie. He emailed HR his resignation letter and made arrangements to pay him his final salary and other money owed. I handed over the keys to the office and the pass to the HR department. As part of his bonus, Andy was always very attentive. Of course, with his new knowledge, Andy wondered if the size of the package was due to guilt on the part of his former family. He called his broker and immediately liquidated his employer's entire stock portfolio, from $10 million. Dollars could not be refused. He opened a new account at the Mercantile and Savers Bank, and when he deposited $10 million into his account, they seemed delighted. Of course, due to the size of the deposit, they would have to notify the authorities, but he expected that and wasn't too worried. Then he returned to his room and called Doug Jenner, who had an opening at 9:30 the next morning. He ate a light dinner from room service, drank a bottle of IPA, watched some documentary on BBC America, and fell asleep at 10 p.m. For some reason, traveling alone and staying in hotels, Andy never managed to stay up late. The next morning, he spoke with Doug Jenner in his office, which, although functional, did not attract much attention, being somewhat rustic. There was a display case with various normal-looking devices, smartphones, smoke detectors, chargers, electrical outlets, etc. After shaking hands, they sat down at the round table. "All these devices look ordinary and inconspicuous," said Doug. "But in fact, they are eavesdropping and listening devices." "True, I don't think they will be useful in your case, but you never know. At least initially, to find out what your wife is doing, my company will use her social networks. Surprisingly, most people who either sexually cheat on their spouse or steal from their employer or business partner are too stupid to realize that they are spreading the word too much to the world. I talked to Mary this morning, and she thinks very highly of you. So I'd be happy to work with you to help you learn what you need to learn. But don't make the mistake of using what I tell you to take revenge on them. I have seen this before, and it never, ever ends well for the victim of deception if he is tempted to follow the path of revenge." Before continuing the conversation, he asked the employee to bring coffee and made Andy sign the contract. Over a cup of coffee, Doug said, "All I need from you is a photo of your wife, your daughters, their grandparents, and details of her social media presence, and also your social networks, and then I will ask my team to begin an investigation." "How long do you think this will take?" Andy asked. "Oh, not too long, I guess." "Let's count 48 hours. They said their goodbyes, and Andy paid his deposit to the prompt and helpful girl at the front desk. The next 2 days were strange for Andy. He missed his old lifestyle, he missed his family, he missed his job. But he understood that his entire previous life was based on lies, and none of it was real. However, overall, he felt good. "I didn't do anything stupid like start smoking or get blackout drunk every night. I even looked at Gideon's Bible, which was in the apartment, although the accompanying the Book of Mormon was only briefly glanced at. After all, the Marriott family is Mormon. He understood and assumed that they loved include the sacred texts of your faith along with the Gideon Bible." He was surprised that before Doug Jenner's 48-hour deadline had expired, he received a call from one of his employees. "Mr. Masters, Mr. Jenner has obtained some information about your wife's infidelity. Could you please visit our office so he can make a report?" Later that afternoon, Doug gave a report to Andy. "Andy, I must say that your fears and suspicions turned out to be correct. Your wife has been in a long-term affair with William Baxter for the past 15 years. Andy swallowed and sighed. "This news confuses me. On the one hand, I am, of course, devastated, but at the same time I feel relieved." Doug nodded. "Yes, I can understand. You felt betrayed, but now you have the information and knowledge to move on with your life." "How did you find out?" Doug shrugged. "Surprisingly simple. Your wife has had a Facebook page since she was Mrs. Baxter, but after marrying you, she deactivated that page and started a new one under the name Katie Masters. However, a few years after her marriage to you, she reactivated her old page under the name Mrs. Baxter, and it is obvious that from that point on, she had two separate lives, one as Mrs. Masters, the other as Mrs. Baxter. My team was able to use the latest artificial intelligence technology to conduct deep searches of her and your social networks, including Google Calendar, your employer's sites, your relatives' social networks, etc., and we were able to match what was happening. Do you remember the moment when your employer began sending you on long business trips as well as on trips abroad? Andy winced. Yes, I remember since you started talking about it. It must have been 14 or 15 years ago. His face darkened with anger. Were these business trips arranged to give her time to be with Baxter? Doug nodded sympathetically. Yes, it seems like that was the case, at least for some trips. And soon after that, I began to receive large bonuses for my work, as well as huge blocks of shares. I bet it was to appease me, right? Doug shook his head. As far as we understand, this was Monk's way of appeasing his conscience at the insistence of his wife, who was not happy with what they were doing to you. How did this affair begin? Asked Doug. Apparently, Baxter came back from that hole where he worked, photographed and painted, apologized to Katie, and Katie decided that she would have two lives. She would be married to two men. you and Baxter, and her father played a key role in keeping you busy and out of the way so that Katie could spend time with Baxter. Did the twins know about this? Yes, we knew. However, they were actually trained and bribed so that they would never tell you, or so that you would not find out about it by accident. But what I can't understand is why all this nonsense about family leave. What was it? Actually, this question is easy to answer. It looks like Billy Baxter's wanderlust is back. He was assigned to work in Antarctica for the next 4 years as an official photographer and artist. Katie didn't like the idea of being separated from her loved one for such a long period of time, and then she came up with an amazing idea, to invite him to replace you for a month's vacation in order to somehow support her, I think one could say. You. What the hell? Who does this? Apparently, she decided she loved both you and Baxter and devised a scheme to keep you both. Will I be able to use the information you found in my divorce case? Yes, Doug said. All this is in the public domain, so we did not bug your wife and her lover. But I wouldn't have the slightest idea how to get this information. Without you, I would be completely screwed. That's why I take my work so seriously, Doug replied. I sent a copy of the report to Mary Northern, and since the case turned out to be so easy, I won't have to present you with another bill, so there you go. They shook hands and parted. Katie returned to an empty house. All her plans to keep both her husbands' lives separate but equal had turned to crap. She felt a mixture of emotions: sadness for Andy, irritation that Bill, her first love, had already flown to New Zealand to begin his 4-year deployment, and she could only console her daughters for losing 2 fathers in their lives. Besides, she was angry about her mother's attitude towards this whole situation. Yes, she understood that Claire had never fully agreed with the idea of separate but equal husbands, but now she was becoming simply unbearable in her statements. Whenever Katie talked about how bad she felt, Claire would respond, "Indeed? Then imagine how bad Andy is now. And he's not to blame for anything, right?" Katie sent Andy a long text message, essentially begging him to give her another chance. She claimed that having Bill Baxter in her life as her second husband had not caused Andy any harm, and hoped that Andy would agree to marriage counseling to help them get back together. Andy took Mary Northern's advice and scheduled an individual consultation with one of the psychologists on her contact list. He shared this message with his consultant, Pete Waters, who whistled and said, crap. Well, isn't she a narcissist or something?" Andy said, "Do you really think she's narcissistic?" Pete shrugged and answered, "Oh, I was partly joking when I called her a narcissist. It's impossible to make a diagnosis from such a short letter, but, to be honest, I do see some narcissistic traits in her. To think that she can manage 2 husbands for most of her marriage, and then express shock, surprise, and even some resentment when her legal husband decides to leave the marriage is not a normal reaction on her part. A little strange, to be honest. Eventually, she had to be exposed." "Please tell me how it really was." Andy told how he found out about the betrayal and how long it lasted. For a month, he had sessions with Pete every 2 weeks, and for the foreseeable future, he reduced them to monthly. Meanwhile, Mary filed for divorce from Kathy and also began legal proceedings for constructive termination of her contract with Marvin Monk and his GWS Corporation. Andy moved from a hotel room to an apartment a few streets away. Deciding to get into business consulting, he went online and ordered office furniture and a new desktop computer from Quill.com. He never dreamed of getting a lot of work, but to my surprise, I quickly found several clients, or they found it through word of mouth and LinkedIn. He received a letter from the GWS legal department threatening him with dismissal. In response, he demanded that they contact his lawyer, Mary Northern of Cascade, Northern and White, rather than him. To his surprise, neither he nor Mary received any further news regarding their termination letter. "They just merged," Mary said, grinning. In early January, Katie received divorce papers and, to Andy's surprise, neither Katie nor the girls tried to contact him, but Mary noted that this was most likely done on the advice of her lawyers. In March, the case was heard by Judge Jennifer Harris, a rather thin, middle-aged woman who looked a bit like Judge Judy. To be fair, she sometimes played along with it. She liked to look at people in court through stylish glasses with half-open frames. Speaking to her secretary, she shook her head. "This thing is real devilry. Worse than the usual cases we see? Oh God, yes. Much worse. A wife has been cheating on her husband with her ex-husband for 15 years, and her stepdaughters and grandparents know about her cheating." The secretary let out a low whistle. Crap. And the wife justifies this? Yes, which should be funny, or not. Andy's testimony was both impressive and depressing. He wrote that he always wanted to be a father and thought he had achieved fatherhood with Cassandra and Emily, but learned that this was not really the case. Now he knows the reason why his ex-wife and her twins did not allow him to adopt them. Now he's at an age where he probably won't be able to have children of his own, and this is yet another thing that his cheating wife stole from him. At 10 in the morning on Wednesday, the case was opened. Your Honor, my name is Mary Northern, and I am representing my client, Mr. Andrew Masters, in his divorce from his wife, Kathy Masters. As a basis, we cite Katie Masters' long and blatant affair with her ex-husband, William Baxter. We have evidence that Mrs. Masters has been unfaithful to her husband for 15 years. I'd like to call the first witness, Douglas Jenner. Doug was sworn in. My name is Doug Jenner. I am the director of Jenner Investments. I was hired by Mr. Andrew Masters to investigate his wife's possible infidelity. What have you found out, Mr. Jenner? I have discovered that Mrs. Masters has been having an affair for the past 15 years, cheating on her husband with her first husband. My detectives learned that Mrs. Masters' employer and father-in-law, Marvin Monk, assisted his daughter in her sexual affairs with her ex-husband by arranging fictitious business trips to give her freedom of action. The evidence we have collected is now part of the divorce affidavit. Thank you, Mr. Jenner. Katie's lawyer, Paul Foster, stood up. He looked slippery, and Andy noticed the look of distaste on the judge's face. He suppressed a smile and thought, "This can't be good for Katie." Your Honor, he said in an authoritative tone, I demand that this so-called evidence be thrown out by the court since it is all private information, obviously obtained illegally by this spy. Judge Harris glared at him. Do you have evidence to support your claims, Mr. Foster? There is none, per se, but how else could he have obtained this supposed evidence? I object, Your Honor, Mary intervened. Either Mr. Foster believes that the evidence is false, which is what he is hinting at, or he believes that it is all true, but obtained illegally. Both of his opinions on this issue cannot be true at the same time, right? I agree, Miss Northern. Mr. Jenner, how did you get this information? Your Honor, my staff and I used exclusively publicly available sources. Accounts on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and other social networks and platforms, as well as public sections of the website of Mr. Masters' employer, GWS. In addition, we discovered a publicly accessible blog by William Billy Baxter, which contains information about his current relationships not only with Mrs. Masters, but also with her twin daughters, as well as his former father-in-law and mother-in-law. We also examined publicly available online calendars. The judge said, "Why didn't you use any listening devices, Mr. Jenner?" Shrugging his shoulders, he said, "Well, aside from the legality of the idea, I don't think it was necessary. The reason is that, like many people who engage in sexual infidelity or fraudulent business practices, they are not the sharpest knives in the knife drawer and seem almost forced to share their misconduct, illicit, and illegal activities." Foster asked sarcastically, "If this is true, then why didn't her husband know about it?" He just didn't look, not really expecting that he should look. I've seen this happen before in similar situations. Foster is an idiot. Andy understood. By acting in this way, trying to challenge the evidence collected by Doug Jenner and his team, he visibly admitted to himself that yes, Katie is a cheater. And then he confronted Andy for not knowing that she was a cheater. What an idiot this Foster is. Judge Harris allowed Doug to sit down. Then she turned to Foster. "Mr. Foster, do you have any evidence that contradicts the evidence presented by Mr. Masters' team?" Foster seemed stumped by this question. "There is none, Your Honor. All I can say on behalf of Mrs. Masters is that she loves her husband and wants him to withdraw his divorce suit. Then why doesn't Mrs. Masters come forward herself?" Caddy spoke in court, and it looked pathetic. "She really loves Andy. She regrets this family cruisy, but it's mostly a misunderstanding, and the only thing she's done wrong is fall in love with two men, Billy and Andy, and want to keep them in her life, two husbands, separate but equal." Foster let Katie speak. Privately, he thought she was an idiot, but he had been paid a considerable sum for representing someone she didn't want, so he would do it to the best of his ability. Mary finally stood up and looked at Katie. "Well, Mrs. Masters, the thought of having two husbands in your life must have made you very happy. A real boost to your self-esteem, but not very good for your legal husband. You, your daughters, and your parents turned Andy into a cuckold, didn't you?" "I don't like the word cuckold," Katie replied with a slight whine in her voice. "Besides, if we consider this word in this context, then Billy is also a cuckold." Mary shook her head. "No. A cuckold is a man who is cheated on by his wife. Bill knew about Andy, didn't he?" Katie nodded. "Yes, I knew. But what's the difference? Andy became a cuckold because of you, but Bill, as far as he knew, was not a cuckold. Bill and Andy were never separate and equal in your life, were they?" "Were. They will still be there if Andy gives up this divorce case. The reason there was no equality and fairness in your relationship with Andy and Billy is because Billy knew everything about Andy. But Andy didn't know anything about Billy's role in your life, did he?" "No. But only because I knew that Andy would never agree to Bill's presence in my life. He wouldn't understand." She began to wipe her eyes with the napkin she was clutching in her hand. Mary sucked in a breath before speaking again. "So you knew that he would demand a divorce if he found out about your affair? Is it almost as if you thought he should have asked for a divorce given the circumstances?" "But I love him. Girls love him." She broke down, and the judge took the opportunity to break for lunch. After dinner, Foster asked Katie a question. "What is your ideal outcome, Mrs. Masters?" "So that Andy would forgive me, experience the pain that I accidentally caused him, and begin counseling both as a couple and individually. Maybe family therapy." "Your Honor," Foster said, now addressing the judge, "we suggest that Mr. Masters drop his divorce suit and seek therapy to help him adjust to the reality of his marriage, in which his wife loves both him and Mr. Baxter." "Is this what you want, Mrs. Masters?" asked the judge. There was great doubt in her voice. "Yes, Your Honor. I would like Andy to go to therapy, perhaps hypnotherapy, to help him come to terms with the fact that he is my husband and Billy is my second husband." By the tribunal's decision, the judge's voice sounded incredulous. "So, you want the court to force your husband to undergo hypnotherapy in order to turn him into your willing and obedient replacement husband?" Foster realized the direction the judge was heading and intervened. "I wouldn't put it in those terms, Your Honor." She gave him a somewhat grim smile. "Well, that's wonderful for you, Mr. Foster, but here is my court, my conditions. If you two geniuses think that I am going to force Mr. Masters to undergo behavior modification therapy to turn him into an obedient and comfortable person, then you should rethink this terrible idea. I won't stand for this, and I doubt that any certified or licensed psychotherapist would even agree to such a heinous proposal." She shook her head. "I reject the petition," Katie said, "but Your Honor, therapy will actually help Andy come to terms with his role in my life. Since Billy would be gone for 4 years, I thought that would be more than enough time for Andy to realize that everything would be okay, to come to terms with the situation." "No," the judge said firmly. "This won't work. I'm getting closer to making my decision. Mrs. Northern, I see that there is a prenuptial agreement whereby the house owned by the company remains with Mrs. Masters, and Mrs. Masters, by virtue of the infidelity clause, retains only 15% of the matrimonial property." "That's right, Your Honor," Foster intervened. "But, Your Honor, I would like to point out that the infidelity clause applies only to Mr. Masters and not to Mrs. Masters. Therefore, without consultation, and if the divorce proceeds as it appears, the infidelity clause in the prenuptial agreement is invalid, and we're demanding 80% of the assets, including the $10 million that Mr. Masters raised by selling his shares in the company. The judge had gone from being merely annoyed to being furious. This is nonsense, Mr. Foster. The infidelity clause applies to both husband and wife. I have rarely heard such self-serving nonsense in my court. Mrs. Masters cheated on her husband for a long time, essentially poisoned the minds of his stepdaughters against him while getting the best of both worlds, while her husband received poor treatment. I've heard enough of this narcissistic nonsense from Mrs. Masters. My decision is that the divorce is granted and the prenuptial agreement is still in full force and effect. And she will not receive any of the proceeds from the sale of the shares. Absolutely nothing. There was a loud hammering sound, and it was all over. They were divorced. Later that day, Mary and Andy enjoyed a hamburger at a coffee shop and restaurant located near the courthouse. "What's next, Andy?" Mary asked. "I discovered that I like the work of a consultant, so I will develop it. I think I might consider moving to Florida. If you don't mind me asking, what are you going to do with the girls? Will you seek a relationship with them in the future?" He shrugged. "I don't understand how I can do this. They both knew their mother was cheating on me and they didn't care. Moreover, they encouraged her and lied to me. So I really don't see the point in worrying." "I see what you're getting at, Andy." They continued to chat about general topics until they left the restaurant and went about their business. A few days later, Kathy asked to meet with Andy. He agreed but demanded that they meet at his lawyer's office. They sat in a medium-sized conference room opposite each other at a polished wood table. "Well then, Katie, you wanted a meeting. What do you want to say?" "Sorry, Andy, I guess I've become greedy and stupid. I actually thought I could keep you and Billy as separate but equal husbands. Obviously, this is unacceptable to you and I'm really sorry." He nodded but remained silent. She continued, "I would also like to know what we will do about your relationship with the twins. They miss you, you know." He looked puzzled. Why would they miss me? Isn't there a real father in their life anymore? I understand that you are angry with me, my parents, and the girls. But the girls are still little, and all they knew was that there were two daddies, okay? So please don't blame them. They lied to me. Knew Billy would be taking my place on that December cruise, and yet they joined you in tricking me at the dinner table that night by pretending to be upset that their grandfather cut me off the cruise." Katie looked upset. "Yes, I know. I know. I understand what you're getting at. We just didn't want you to suffer the consequences of being kicked off the cruise and replaced by Billy. But I think it still hurts you. More than you will ever understand, Katie. You, all of you, destroyed me." "Will you meet the girls?" she asked. "What happened to Billy, their real father? Where is he?" "I've already gone on a business trip to take photographs and paint pictures. He will be away from home for 4 years. This is a big deal for him. Quite a prestigious job. So you got rid of me, your cuckolded husband, and the man you replaced me with left you for at least 4 years. It sucks to be you and your daughters, Katie. So to answer your question, I will not date your daughters. It's too early for me, Katie. Maybe I'll get in touch with Cassandra and Emily someday, but don't hold your breath." This ended their meeting. That day, while Andy was sorting out books in the library, which he laughingly called his library corner, he was slightly shocked by a phone call from Claire, his former mother-in-law. "Hello, Claire. How can I help?" "Hello, Andy. Please accept my apologies for what was done to you." "Okay, I accept." He waited for her to continue speaking. "I warned Kathy and Marvin that the idea of having you and Baxter as separate but equal husbands would not work because it was completely wrong and stupid. And it's completely unfair to you. You did nothing to deserve such treatment. I told the girls not to listen to the bullshit that Kathy and Marvin were feeding them, but they were too young and were thrilled by the secrecy in having 2 fathers. Katie told me, you don't plan on seeing any girls. As their grandmother, I am saddened by this, but as your mother-in-law, I sympathize with you and completely understand your position." "Thank you, Claire. What you say is very helpful. I'm glad you said that. What else do you have? Well, I'm breaking up with Marvin. How? Why? Because I really don't want to continue living with a person who can pull a trick like this nonsense about going on vacation. I know he did it because he loved Katie, and she had him wrapped around her little finger, but even so, letting creepy crap like Bill Baxter take your place on a family cruise was completely shitty of him. And I realized that I don't really want to live with Marvin, at least not in the short term. And then, I really don't know. If you thought the idea of separate but equal husbands was wrong, why didn't you do anything about it? Because I saw how happy you were and hoped that Katie would stop being such an idiot. But she never stopped. I guess I was trying to ease my conscience by making sure you were getting compensated for the crap that Kathy, Marvin, the girls, and I probably too were putting on you. Like, I made Marvin give you those shares, you know. She laughed. Andy chuckled too. Thank you for that at least, Claire. It's nice to know that at least one family member has my back. At least to some extent. What are you going to do now? I do business consulting and I like it. Will you stay in the city? I'm thinking about moving. There's really no reason for me to stay here. I'll miss you, Andy. Yes, me too, Claire. I'll miss you. They ended the conversation. In fact, he was sorting through books in preparation for moving to Florida. He contacted Julia, who promised to help him meet with real estate agents in Florida. She also sent him a photo of her younger sister, saying that she had recently divorced. She, as Andy realized, is also, on a scale of 1 to 10, easily a 15. Maybe this divorced life won't be as hard as I thought, he said to his reflection, grinning. He visited Florida, met with Julia and a real estate agent her daughter knew, and bought a nice house a few miles from Julia. I also had lunch with Julia and her sister, and he agreed with Sonia, his sister, to start dating when he moved to Florida. Both suffered from cheating spouses, so both did not plan to rush. Andy was intrigued that she was already talking about the possibility of having children with him. And over the course of several years of a happy, normal marriage, they had 2 children, and life in general, and married life in particular, was extremely good. As for his former marriage, his former family, as he said to Sonia and Julia at dinner one night, after they had put the children to bed, "You can't drive along the highway of life looking over your shoulder, otherwise you'll crash. My former family is a thing of the distant past, and you and our children, Sonia, are my present and future." He was glad that Claire divorced Marvin. Obviously, he was not just carried away by replacing Julia, but found himself in a compromising situation with Katie and the twins. Andy laughed when she said on Facebook that they didn't have a prenup, so the divorce was very costly for him. He chuckled when Claire revealed that she had found herself a young tennis professional to help her improve her service, or something like that. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.